Welcome, everybody. You are at the Climate Equity How We Win panel. And the purpose of the panel is to discuss climate change and what we can do locally to make this a better world that we live in. I'm going to start with a brief announcement by Eduardo Stanley, our editor. Eduardo, take it over.
Thank you, Mike. Muy buenas tardes, ¿cómo están? Gracias por estar aquí en este importante panel. El anuncio que les tengo que hacer es que habíamos programado tener una traducción simultánea al español, pero por razones técnicas esto no se va a poder realizar. Así que los invitamos a que continúen escuchando el diálogo en inglés sobre este importante tema, pero ustedes pueden conseguir el suplemento en el periódico Community Alliance, que está en español y en inglés, y ustedes van a recibir una información muy, pero muy valiosa. Gracias por estar con nosotros, gracias por seguir al periódico Community Alliance, cuya sección en español está creciendo, gracias a todos ustedes. Muy buenas noches.
Thank you, Eduardo. Just a moment about who the Community Alliance newspaper is, in case you don't know. We are an alternative independent newspaper in Fresno. This will be our 25th anniversary in September. The thing that's really unique about the Community Alliance newspaper is that we are alternative, independent, and we have a purpose. We're not about making money. We are about building a progressive movement for social change. We support groups and individuals who are working on issues in the community like immigration reform, police accountability, climate change. We support homeless issues. What sets us apart from other publications is that we give the people working on the issues who are part of grassroots organizations an opportunity to say in their own words what's going on and how things can be improved. So if you're a homeless person and you're always being defined by other people, that's problematic because we need to hear directly from people who are involved in what's going on around them, not ourselves being the ones to define their reality. And that's what we've done with this climate change, climate equity issue. Kevin came to us, he suggested a special section, and he had lots of good ideas for how to get your voices out into the community more broadly. And so that's what we did. We talked about it. Everybody agreed it was a great idea. And I will tell you one more thing, and that is that it's been rather controversial. I've heard from a number of city council members, people who aspire to be on the city council, and a lot of those people take exception to what Kevin says. So he must be doing something right to be in such good trouble with the elected officials in this community. And we're just really honored that he asked us to produce this special section. I mean, he did the work on it. We published it, we've gotten it out to thousands of people. And now we're fortunate enough to be able to have the people who put it together and people from those organizations to be with us tonight to tell us what's going on. And there will be some back and forth with questions, and that'll be done through the chat. So I think Kevin will explain that a little bit more later. But for now, it's with great honor that I introduce Kevin Hall, who is really the brains behind this whole special section and for us to do this Zoom call tonight. So Kevin, it's in your court.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for the kind words, and thank you to all the people who contributed to the special section, and especially for the great work you all do. And this is an amazing opportunity for us to record this and capture at least a snapshot of where we are in 2021 and how you see the immediate and midterm future. So let's jump right into it, please. I think it would be very helpful if we started with a quick round of introductions where you each take a minute or two and tell us about your organization and a bit about yourself. And then as we go through the conversation, we'll learn a lot more about your work and the specifics. We'll take it in alphabetical order and start with Shada Azamian from Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. And we'll consider this our introductions as we go along rather than do them all at once now. Thank you, Shada.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I'm so honored to be here and to learn from fellow advocates and colleagues who I wish I had the chance to connect with more. I'm Shada Azamian, and I'm with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. And I'm based in Fresno, but Leadership Council's work spans all over rural inland California, all the way down from Coachella, all the way up to Merced. And I'm a climate policy coordinator, so I work in different climate, air quality, some energy and transportation spaces to assess to what extent policy represents and truly advocates for the priorities of communities that are most impacted by the climate crisis. I most often am engaging the Air District and the State Air Board, and I'm really excited about local work that's continuing in Fresno around climate change, health equity with some really key partners in Fresno as well. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Next up, Juan Flores.
Hi, Kevin, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel and for all of you to make time to listen to us. It's such a privilege to be with my wonderful colleagues, and like Shada, I look forward to learning and getting to meet some of you today. The Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment was founded over 30 years ago, and we're located in Delano in Kern County. And our legal team, we have organizers and attorneys, and our legal team holds an office in Emerville in the Bay Area. We work with low-income communities, communities of color, most of it in Kern County, Tulare County, and Kings County. And we also have a presence at the national level through different coalitions and some policy making that we do once in a while. We have a base of about close to 700 community members just in Kern County that are actively engaged on any issues that regards environmental justice. We have 3 major campaigns: the climate justice campaign, which is the biggest one. We do oil and gas work under that umbrella. Then we have the toxic-free communities, where we do most of our work on DTSC, and then pesticides-free, where we do everything about pesticides and air quality. And again, it's an honor to be here, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We're honored to have you. And next we'll go to Pedro Hernandez, please, with Sunrise Movement.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm one of the hub coordinators for the local chapter of the Sunrise Movement, Cartel's Fresno Sunrise Movement. We are a relatively new climate action, youth-oriented group that focuses on advancing the Green New Deal, one of the only federal policy packages that's proposed to actually, handle the climate crisis that we're currently facing. We also focus on building capacity with young organizers to make sure that they have the skills to succeed, but also stay within the movement. And then also prioritize many solidarity campaigns locally in our community, because we realize that while climate change is only one of the many crises we face, even if we have a healthy environment, if we're not supporting issues like racial justice or social justice, that our community is still at risk. So we want to also make sure that our climate space is showing up for summer communities, especially here in the Fresno area and the San Joaquin Valley. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm super interested in learning more as well too. So thank you all.
Thank you, Pedro. And then our fourth panelist, I should mention, Marcel Woodruff, is pitching in at the last moment. Kashawn White had to take care of other matters and couldn't be here. He sends his apologies. But Marcel, would you please take it away?
Definitely. So my name is Marcel Woodruff. I am with Faith in the Valley, lead organizer, and I'm also with Advanced Peace Fresno. But before all of that, I was a youth organizer, and I had the blessings to watched Keyshawn White develop a project around air quality and environmental racism. So I'm actually here today in proxy for Mr. Keyshawn White and reporting on his project and what he's doing. This project began 4 years ago when he was made aware of the fact that people in his zip code and his geography live 22 years less than those in the more affluent communities. He responded by realizing that, hey, a lot of times people in geographies, that they're painted by a certain narrative and that they often are blamed for the misery that they face. And so he said, I want to design a project in which something that's outside of our control can be measured, and we can demonstrate how environmental racism is a factor here. He chose air quality. For the last 4 years, he's been doing air quality through a participatory model where he educates the community, he builds technology, and he brings in young people to build technology such as mobile apps. As they install purple air monitors, they capture data, they report it to the community, and they educate the community on what the data means and the adverse effects of these data that these numbers have on actual human lives. So I'll be here representing Mr. Keyshawn White today.
Thank you very much, Marcel. So you can see we're off to a really strong start, but we're going to pause for a moment and ask Eduardo to repeat his announcement regarding translation. Thank you, Eduardo.
Thank you, Kevin. Muy buenas noches, ¿cómo están? Esperemos que estén disfrutando de este panel. El anuncio que les voy a hacer es que lamentablemente no hemos podido llevar adelante nuestra intención, que era tener una traducción simultánea en español para que todos ustedes estén bien informados, pero prometemos obviamente que en el futuro lo vamos a poder llevar adelante. Sí les pedimos, para que ustedes se mantengan bien informados sobre este tema tan importante que es el cambio climático, que lean el suplemento de Community Alliance, y ustedes lo pueden ver en el sitio internet, que es www.fresnoalliance.com. Los esperamos ahí, mándenos mensajes, denos su opinión y muchísimas gracias. Buenas noches. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you very much, and we apologize for the lack of translation again. And now, first big question, the issue is equity, and how do you define it where you live or in your work, or however you would like to frame that? And we'll go in order from Juan to Marcel to Pedro to Sheda. And Juan, take it away, please.
Thank you, Kevin. Equity it's a big topic. It's pretty much the fundamental the fundamental basis of any social justice movement, right? We're trying to achieve a level field. Equity is completely different than equality, right? And I think we already know the difference about that. Equity on environmental justice communities would probably pretty much look like this panel. If you look at the diversity, experiences, age differences, equity should be reflected like that in our communities. Sadly, in low-income communities and communities of color, as my colleagues will probably let you know later on, it's not reflected. It's missing. Why? Because our communities have been targeted. I'm gonna put on the chat so everybody can see a link to a report that was published in 1984. It's called the Cerro Report. I'm pretty sure some of you might probably read it. Some of you probably haven't heard about it, but I was listening, you know, to a lot of people that kind of blame our communities for being on the place that they are right now. Almost like if being poor was a choice, like if not having an education was a choice. And it's not that. Believe me, none of us are born saying, oh, you know what, I want to be poor. Or you know what, I want to live right next to a toxin dump. You know what, I don't want to go to university. Well, probably some of us don't have that wish, but I think at one point we all have the dream to succeed. And we all have the dream to live a long life. And sometimes our future has already been written down by someone else that sometimes is not even our parents. On this case, the Cerro Report. On the Cerro Report, the link that I just put on the chat, was commissioned by the governor of California in 1984, 2 years before. I think it was Pete Wilson, if I'm not mistaken. And on that report, it actually tells you where California should cite their dirtiest industries. where it would be a lot easier for them to pollute and contaminate and literally kill people without resistance. The first page is a summary of that report. You're more than welcome to read the whole report, but the summary in itself is very telling of what's happening right now in our communities. I'll read it really quick for you. The least likely communities to resist. They have to be communities with the following characteristics. They have to be Southern, Midwestern communities, rural communities, open to promises of economic benefits. They have to be conservative, Republican, and believe on the free market. They have to be above middle age, high school or less education. They have to be low-income communities. They have to be Catholic communities, not involved in social issues. They have to be all communities that have all-time residents, people that have been living there for more than 20 years. Nature exploitive occupations like farming, ranching, and mining. That's a clear picture of the Central Valley, sorry to say. So by no mistake are our communities the most affected. Today, the Lung Cancer Association came out with a report on air pollution, and no surprise, it was a Central Valley community that ranked one of the highest ones, and that was Bakersfield. And that is not new to Bakersfield. That is not new to any of our communities, right? From Bottom Willow to Kettleman City to Hanford, Dos Palos, all of these are communities that have suffered. And they were destined to suffer because they're not being given the same opportunity that the rest of the rich communities of California. So how would equity look? Equity would probably look something in the same words of the residents that I work with here in Kern County. After the economic crisis of 2008, we did a gathering of community members and we said, look, for sure, we're gonna suffer another economic crisis. We don't know when, and we don't know whether it's gonna be worse or it's gonna be less than this economic crisis. But what can we do to help you to level that field? Because a lot of our residents lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost everything. Their little savings were out of the window in 2008. And they said, look, we come from Central and South America. We come from Mexico. We come from the Middle East, and we have a common denominator. We know how to farm. We know agriculture. That's how we do it, because we are the kids, we're the children of the earth, and we know how to treat Mother Earth, and we know how to take care of Mother Earth. The only thing is that here in California, we work sun in, sun out for someone else, for a big corporation that owns thousands upon thousands of acres of land. And we're gonna die and we're gonna retire and we're not gonna leave nothing behind for our kids. What we wanna do is, for once, we wanna work the land for us, for our kids, for our grandkids. We wanna leave a heritage behind, but we want to prove society that it can be done on a safe manner. They said, teach us to do organic agriculture. And that was a big boom for CRPE and for the communities of Kern County. We have about, it's not a lot, but it's about 11 acres of land that we have that are supporting over 85 families, actually over 100 families in Kern County to do organic farming. And that was huge, because that conversation of organic farming, of equity on the land, of equity on the economy, because it's not only about environmental justice, it's about economic justice as well. It's about healthcare for everyone. It's about an end to racism, right? So when we were talking about organic farming and all of this, then people started questioning, how are we going to do organic farming with 7 oil wells right next to our community garden? How are we gonna do organic farming when on the farm right next to us, they're applying tons of pesticides and they're gonna drip into our crops? How can we truly make this our own when the system, the economic system that we have is not equitable? It doesn't allow for us to be part of it. They don't want to share the wealth with us. And that literally opened the spectrum of environmental justice in the Central Valley to another different level. There have been fights already against the oil industry, but nothing on the level that we saw around the year 2012, when people said enough is enough, right? We need to put a fight, and we need to break down the stereotypes. That's what equity looks in our communities. Our community members being at the table, making decisions for themselves, for their kids, without any economic justification, which is usually what big corporations do, right? How come we haven't been able to ban fracking or put setback limits in our communities and stop dangerous drilling within our neighborhoods? Because there's always this false claim: you're gonna kill jobs, you're gonna kill our economy. In 2019, when we put an oil and gas ordinance in the city of Irving, that was the main argument from the oil corporations. You are going to kill the oil corporations. And when we asked them, well, how much money do you make out of Irving? They only made about $5,000. So if we were to put an end to oil extraction in Irving, that's how much money they would have wasted. So equity in our communities looks at as an inclusion, as something that belongs to everyone, as decisions being made by those most affected, not those that are going to benefit economically, but by those that are being affected by those decisions. And with that, I would like to wrap up. And if any of my colleagues has any thoughts, I would be more than happy to listen to them as well.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Marcel next.
Definitely. Thank you for that one. That was good words. I think as we work through it, equity at the core of it comes down to disproportionality, right? That just to be born in a particular geography or particular zip code determines your lifespan. And equity is about really saying what are those social determinants of health that make some people's lifespans in certain areas less than certain than others, right? And building the infrastructure to rectify that. But I think that equity has to be bracketed within justice, right? That the fact that inequity has existed for so long means that harm has been done, like lives have been lost, people have suffered, and we have to account for that as we build these infrastructures. I mean, going back to how, like, I live in Fresno, how West Fresno was zoned, rezoned, how highways were built there in a way that engineered the space so the people there didn't have livelihoods and they couldn't really breathe freely, breathe clearly, is what Keyshawn's work is about. But also even going further back, right, to the Yokuts people, to people who occupied this place first, who developed this land for centuries, who were removed. A plantation economy was set in place, and harm continued to be done to land and to people's bodies, right? And so it's really about redesigning this infrastructure, identifying the harms that have been done, and empowering people, empowering community members to lead the change so that we have a more equitable and just future and equitable and just land. That's my spiel. Who's after me?
Pedro, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. How what a fun conversation, I must say. Yeah, so we can go on all night. But as far as equity from the Fresno Sunrise Movement perspective, I guess I'll mention two main ways of the many kind of ways we're trying to meaningfully incorporate equity. I think one is on larger policy, because at the end of the day, we need to admit that, while individual changes are important, as far as like lifestyle changes and everything too, we still need to, seize control of the halls of power and all the decision-making spaces to make sure that the institutions of government, as well as funding and policymakers, serve the ecological and social needs of our planet. Right. Currently, the system of political representation, even in the San Joaquin Valley, is perpetuating injustice and inequity. Whether it's false promises, whether it's mainstream Democratic senators or assembly members actively sabotaging critical environmental justice legislation against the oil industry or against polluting dairy industries, as well as two examples. We know that the system is not meeting our needs. And so as far as equitable climate policy, we didn't make sure that anything that we are advocating for meets people's needs as far as their health, as far as their overall well-being, but expanding those conversations and make sure that we're also supporting jobs and then also supporting, you know, our indigenous communities and Black and brown communities in these larger processes. You know, and I know my colleagues will expand a little more on those points, but I guess I want to also say equity as far as the organizing space that we're cultivating. I think it's also a concern of making sure that the organizing spaces that we're organizing are meeting the needs of our members. And so as a youth organization, we have, you know, members ranging from community college to, you know, kind of like early career professionals and, you know, some, you know, younger students as well too. And so we have, you know, different needs that people have. And so this is not only, you know, us making sure that our organizing space tackles the issues that matter to people. So this is not only climate. This is also, again, support against the Fresno Asian American Pacific Islander community against the hate crimes in our community. This is also making sure that our climate space is showing up for the street vendors here in Fresno that have been attacked and also victimized by hate crimes. And so I think that the way that we serve and meaningfully incorporate equity is by making sure we're creating space in our group. You know, making sure also that we're not creating organizing spaces that make people split their identities. You know, you can care about climate and you can care about racial justice. And any environmental movement that forces, you know, activists to choose one or the other is also perpetuating inequity and also perpetuating false solutions that have got us to this point. And so, you know, we're also, and so it's, I'll kind of wrap up here where, at least in my role in our hub, I try to support, you know, our younger activists, but also, again, make sure that we're using our energy to implement real change on not only the local, but state and federal policy level as well, too. So, you know, equity is important, and I think just more broadly, we need to make sure that equity is a part of every conversation, not just an activist conversation, not just, you know, a climate conversation, but that's the only real way that we'll achieve an equitable society. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where this conversation goes after.
Thanks, Pedro. Shada?
That was amazing. Yeah, I just want to uplift what Pedro said about all identities needing to be welcomed in order to get to like the sheer power that we as a civil society truly have to be a counterweight to the decisions that are inclusive of community. And what Juan said about working and living for yourself and your community and not for someone else, and Marcel about access to knowledge that informs action. These are all principles that aren't accounted for in everyday policy decisions, informal community planning decisions, land use planning decisions. The work that I do and that Leadership Council does fundamentally seeks to shift this culture of policymaking. And there's so many ways that inequity shows itself in our neighborhoods and the neighborhoods that we work with. And it's because it's a symptom of many root issues. I think equity is feeling like you belong and you have a voice in your communities and you have the ability to advance your community. Equity is living like we all belong to each other and truly knowing that the reality that when someone is hurting over there, I'm hurting over here because we are all connected. We're all downstream from climate impacts. Yeah, so I think equity is being able to co-create with community members. Decisions are made every day that take this power out of the hands of community members and make these decisions for communities. And so much of civil society is living with decisions that are just not made by them. They're made by a handful of people, often with their own self-interest in mind. And it's truly devastating how mainstream this is in policymaking. And that's just one root injustice we see that I think leads to lots of inequity, especially when there's gatekeeping involved in policy decisions, and you have to know the technical details in order to be at the table, and we just need to turn that on its head. That is inequity in process, and process is just as important as the outcomes that we want to achieve as well.
Thank you, Shada. I enjoy watching your co-panelists, all of you nod your heads as one another speaks. I can see it's resonating. The second half of the question is, how do we win? And that comes to tactics and specific campaigns, but however you want to address the question. And it's Pedro's turn to go first on this. So Pedro, would you please kick it off for us?
Yeah, I will dare to answer this question. But I guess, I mean, I can go a bunch of different ways, but I will say, at least, you know, just personally, I'll throw out a couple points. One is, I think we're starting off with being honest with the level of power that we actually can exercise. And, you know, in my personal perspective, I feel that we need to power build and invest a lot of energy in power building. And I mean like long-term marathon grinding power building, because it's easy to make sure, it's easy to loop someone into a movement, and, you know, there's a big protest and you have people involved for a couple of weeks, you know, or, you know, there's another kind of like tragedy or major news event that kind of, you know, spurs someone to make some performative activism, whether it's on social media or, you know, whether it's, you know, in their personal lives as well. But I think real power building, that's like kind of, that kind of first tier is like maybe tapping the potential, but real power building is making sure that we can support people in the movement, you know, moving forward and forever as well. So that's like solidarity in the organizing spaces we're building. That's also providing, again, adequate resources for people to be sustainable in this movement as well. I you know, having worked in the nonprofit world as well too, I'm very familiar with burnout. I'm very familiar with high turnaround as well. And in the nonprofit world, that's kind of an ideal situation where you have health insurance and you're paid full time to be doing all this stuff. But even that system still, you know, eats up and chews out, you know, organizers as well. So I think just more broadly, we need to make sure that the spaces we're cultivating can host these people long term. Again, that's building real relationships. That's building the kind of the social infrastructure that when you have a political crisis and, you know, you need to make a call at like 9 p.m. To be like, this city council meeting's going down, like, you know, those types of relationships help make sure the other person on the line like answers the phone. You know, and those relationships as well make sure that people like keep showing up, you know, even the long term. Because even something like building a street, putting sidewalks down, that's a multi-year process. That's applications, that's building it, that's getting the money, and then the whole like charade of like opening the sidewalk or crosswalk. So that's its own process. So something as little as that, you know, takes years. And so I just want to be, you know, honest, even with like the organizers that like, you know, potential young organizers or people who want to, you know, become more involved in activism, is that, you know, this is, you know, again, just being real about it, it can be like a very tough call. And again, that's all the more reason for us to build a like space that is cultivated on solidarity and love, right? I do think that a lot of the reasons why we're all here is because we have, you know, we're tapping into that love component of our spirit. You know, we love our community, we love trees, we love birds. There's so many things that like that expands into. But then like, again, like as I mentioned, we need like strong policy change also. And so like that's building capacity to teach people how to activate, you know, how to activate their community to exert pressure on elected officials, to, you know, install new elected officials when the ones that, you know, are in power are not meeting our needs. But then that's also, I believe, yeah, it's destroying like white supremacy culture too. You know, I have to say, even in like public meetings, you go to a county supervisor's meeting, it's mostly all white men. They're all dressed in like fancy suits. And so even the culture and even the spaces that are supposed to be public, that are supposed to be inviting to you, that are supposed to be the places you go for help, right? because of that, toxic white supremacy or, patriarchal, old school levels of thought, the very places you're supposed to go to help are antagonistic and cause harm as well. So I do think fundamentally like shifting those cultures and making sure that those spaces like work effectively for us and is something. And that's like baseline, but fundamentally for us to make meaningful progress, like I do think those kind of like softer skills or maybe more of those like cultural components must be incorporated, because again, like we need to make sure that we're not causing harm to the people we're trying to recruit. Because again, I think like it's also stopping the cycle of like violence onto brown communities, stopping the cycle of like violence onto women and other marginal identities. And so I personally want to keep cultivating a space that no longer makes those oppressive acts necessary for us to work together. So maybe I'll maybe wrap up and just say the Green New Deal is important. At the end of the day, we still need policy change and we need a just transition to make sure that whatever polluting industries we're abandoning, we're making sure that people are not left behind and that we're not causing further harm. So that's maybe what I'll say for this little part.
Thanks, Pedro. Juan, the question is how we win. Take it any way you like, please. And thank you, Pedro, for a great setup there.
I mean, as Pedro was mentioning, creating a movement and belonging to a movement. I think there are so many important campaigns that each one of my colleagues here and myself are working on that they're very intersectional. We come at cross paths a lot. And I think being part of the movement, holding elected officials accountable, I think that's one of like the key portion. We have to hold them accountable. And we have to question them, because a lot of times, when we go up to a city council meeting, a board meeting, wherever it is, they're always questioning us, right? Where do you get your data from? What are you basing that off? What scientific report are you talking about? And then all of a sudden they go off on making all these claims. So the oil industry provides thousands of jobs. What about asking them, how many? And how's my community impacted? Oh, but then they give us so much tax revenue for our budget in our schools. Well, let's talk about budget. How much of that goes to police departments or the sheriff's department, and how much of it actually goes to children, clinics, schools? Let's talk about that, because there's a huge inequality there, right? On the amount of money that they're using their budget. So it is part of being the movement. It's part of resistance. It's part of being out there, outside on the street protesting. That's part of it as well. But it's also part of questioning them and really asking them for once to be accountable to us and tell us, give us your numbers, give us your data. We want tangible items. I think that's how we were able to win. The Green New Deal, it's a wonderful, it's a movement now. It's not just policy, but it's a movement that incorporates, I think, every single other social justice movement. So if we're able to jump in, support it, and make sure that we're telling our elected officials, listen to this, listen to the Green New Deal, because this is what our communities need. This is what our nation needs right now if we truly want to heal and move forward.
Thank you very much. But I'm sorry, Juan, I was reading my list. We're about almost to the halfway point, and we'll be moving to Q&A after that. But we have a couple of more panelists to comment on this of how we win. Shada, would you go next, please?
Sure, yeah. I want to echo what Pedro said about investing a lot of energy into community building, which truly is all about genuine relationships with people and being rooted in your community, which will help this movement for all of us. We will not live in a clean or sustainable future if we don't have the partnerships and collaboration to get us there and to speak on after. So I think a huge part of it is modeling the behavior with each other that we want to see in this new world we're trying to build, which is putting youth and communities of color, most impacted communities at the forefront, nurturing these spaces of healing and joy, really sharing the wealth and knowledge. Like we need to be practicing these sustainable behaviors ourselves, and be advocating for them. Like that is a clear demand for systemic change as well. But it also makes us more resilient in this movement, and that's irreplaceable. Yeah, I'll just end on, I also highly recommend this film called Condor and the Eagle, which I thought modeled so beautifully what it is to work in this kind of space, in healing and in joy and in togetherness. I learned a lot from it. I just saw it yesterday.
Condor and the Eagle.
Condor and the Eagle.
Thank you very much. Marcel.
Definitely. Yeah, so one of the drawbacks of having me and Keyshawn is you get this younger, more vibrant, hopeful person, and instead of this old guy who doesn't believe anything anymore. But so Keyshawn, my favorite quote is, "The arc of the universe bends toward chaos" by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Keyshawn's favorite quote is, "The arc of the universe bends toward justice" by Martin Luther King. And so I'm going to answer this question through Keyshawn's lens, because I don't want to be the pessimistic, we got to just keep fighting until it's over guy. I want to be the guy that says we can win. So Keyshawn's project began years ago when he lost his brother to a homicide. And when the police arrived, the first question they asked was, was he in the gang? And so Keyshawn processed that, realized like, hey, they wanted to normalize and identify my older brother as somebody designated for death. And that became the problem, right? We live in a system in which we've normalized and designated certain bodies to die and be disposed of prematurely. I know when we look back in when he first started doing his project, and 1/3 of all premature deaths in Fresno were actually related to issues that were connected to air quality. And so his imagination says this, that we have to decolonize our minds. We have to first begin with the lens that says nobody is disposable. Nobody should be designated to die prematurely. And what are the systems in place that say that go against this notion? What are the systems in place that normalize the death and destruction and disposal of people prematurely? And how do we dismantle those? And how do, like he's better than me, this, how do we imagine a way forward? How do we connect with those people who have been impacted? How do we connect with those people who have been suffering and dying as a result of this, and equip them and empower them to charge the way forward? And so that leads me to maybe a few months ago, he did a parks cleanup. You know, it's like they went around, they did parks cleanups, and the Fresno Bee got a hold of what he was doing. And they asked him a question about, like, hey, you know, Marcel works with Advanced Peace, and your brother was a victim of homicide. What does gun violence and air quality have to do with one another? And he answered the question. So he answered the question. It became an article in Fresno Bee that ultimately got picked up by the New York Times, right? And so you have this imagination that says, hey, we have to decolonize our minds by thinking deeper, by connecting pieces that formerly we were taught to keep disconnected and isolated, and allowing those of us who have that imagination to connect these pieces, to build systems such as Advanced Peace and a myriad of others to drive the change while changing the narrative. And so I think that would be Keyshawn's answer. How do we win? I think we have to decolonize our minds by changing the narratives and allowing impacted people to really drive these changes by investing in them and stimulating their imagination. So that's the non-pessimistic old man answer.
You're not a pessimist, because pessimism is the refuge of a lazy intellect. Well, no, actually, that's cynicism. You have a healthy skepticism. I share it. We're reaching the halfway point, and we're going to move into the Q&A. And before I ask Mike to say a few words, I'm going to ask Marcel to think of a question that he can ask his fellow panelists, because we're moving into the Q&A section. And Marcel, maybe you could just ask it of one panelist, and whoever you ask a question of, they get to ask one of the next, and we'll do one round like that. And then we'll throw it open to our audience and ask you to either text us or drop a question into the chat, or speak up and ask it live. So while Marcel thinks of who he's going to ask a question of, and everybody else thinks of who they want to ask a question of, Mike, take it away, please.
Thanks, Kevin. If you have been enjoying these speakers as much as I have, you know the value of hearing directly from people who are involved in the struggle. The Community Alliance has a special section this month that gives voice to climate equity. And it's a deep dive into that. We have also had articles about immigrant rights, about police accountability, spoken from the people who are engaged in that struggle. And we believe it's important that this voice that you're hearing tonight will also be heard by people who are engaged in LGBTQ issues, people who are interested in peace and getting us out of these endless wars. We need to build a movement that unites and speaks to each other and shows solidarity with these various movements, because there's a lot that needs to be done, and we need to be listening to each other and listening to the grassroots about where we go from here and how we can be effective. If you're interested in having that conversation, you should subscribe to the Community Alliance newspaper. I think we've posted it in the chat, how you can do that. And I want you to know that we can't do this without the support of the community. We never have been, but we need more people and more voices engaged, and we need to be a part of the change that needs to come. So I invite you to join us. And with that, it's back to Kevin and the panel.
Thank you. And thank you to Raina for posting the link to the film that Shada recommended. Marcel, I think I left it in your hands. What question do you have, and for whom, please?
Oh, definitely. I have a question for you, Shada. So, we spoke about, I know Pedro spoke about white supremacy, and we all spoke about the importance of movements. And so right now, I think a really, not trendy, but a really popular movement that's happening within the spaces we inhabit is a movement around anti-racism, right? That it's not enough to say you're not a racist. You have to be an anti-racist if you really want to dismantle these racist systems. And so my question for you is, how does anti-racism and the movement show up in your work as you work to dismantle the systems of climate injustice?
Thank you. Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is how much of policymaking is colorblind to race, and how much of our work is about calling it out for policymakers, saying like, how can you say this isn't a racist policy when this area is like 99%, Black and Latino, and they also experience the worst air quality in the city. And it doesn't, there's a really great book called Color of Law that also talks more about this. And I think it's really about uplifting these systemic harms and injustice that policymakers don't think are part of their work. They don't take them on as the reality of the work or the reality of the communities that they're representing and working with, or not working with. And it's really exposing that in conversations that are devoid of an acknowledgement of race and of historic harm that's been caused. I also really like what you said about decolonizing your mind. And I think a lot of this work needs, the work we're doing, all of us, is in need of more decolonization. The fact that this work is like a profession and not something that everyone can just do is testament to that. And the spaces we show up in are very white supremacist. We just need to be able to know that we don't have to go into these spaces and conform to white supremacy. It's kind of just perpetuating it. Not kind of, it is perpetuating it. And just being very confident and comfortable in that moral clarity. I hope that was partially answered.
Fully answered, thank you.
I think I'm popcorning now. I really appreciate, Pedro, what you said about creating joyful spaces. And I wanted to know what's a time in your work, perhaps with community, that you feel like there's been like a healing, maybe not even joyful, but like a healing and very like community supportive space. Um, yeah, in your work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's funny. I was gonna ask a question too about like joy and stuff. So I'm still gonna ask it, but I'm glad we're on this wavelength here. Yeah. That's a good question. I want to say like as far as like healing as well too. I mean, I think honestly, I'll just say our last Sunrise General meeting, so maybe like a week or two ago, was actually just personally, at least for me, and I don't want to speak on behalf of my comrades, but I do feel that it was very just when you it's kind of hard to say, but when you have like a good meeting, everyone's I don't know, there's just like that feeling. I see Juan a little bit, but the context, I think, for why it was important for us to be having a good meeting is because, like, as a group, right, we're volunteers, and so we're not supported by, a larger, nonprofit or a funder. So a lot of our energy is, volunteer and entirely grassroots. And so this is has been a space where we have, again, young 20-somethings, and again, our hub, I'm not the founder, but our hub really started taking off in January of last year. So about maybe 2 or 3 months before the pandemic, like really closed everything down, right? And so it's been a year or so of like demonstrating like the resilience of the community and the folks who have been like in this space. Because again, not only have we been dealing with the pandemic, the inability to like organize like in person again, which like as those in-person spaces were super important for us to invite people to like have those kind of side conversations that like build more communities instead of just like focusing on work all the time. Also dealing with like the mental like stress of seeing like our community again be affected by COVID, the kind of like terror that like instilled on folks as well, seeing people that we're close to really feeling it. And so the reason why I think like it was a good meeting and just why I think it was also particularly healing is because in spite of all that stuff, like our little ragtag volunteer group has grown into like a mighty, small but mighty like group of like activists where, in this last year, some of our members have been appointed to like local committees, like some of our members have, become more prominent in activist spaces or, have pursued like more like longer term, like full-time employment in the environmental world. And so just kind of like seeing everyone like own more space in our meeting, but then also celebrate like a lot of the great work we've been able to do too. There is a certain like resilience, I think, that like demonstrates that like we can be up to the task, but also like we can have fun doing it too. And so I think just like the healing part for me was just that like people are still here and that like people still find value, like in spite of, again, all the pandemic, in spite of all the leadership changes, in spite of all the like financial stress that people have on top of the wildfire season we had, just like all of those very hard things, like, that our space was still deemed useful and still like people find value in it too. I just think it's a testament because a lot of those challenges could spell disaster for a lot of different groups too. So, I'm just like personally grateful that, we could build this in less than a year online, no less, and so it's also, I think, exciting to imagine like what the future can hold, just given how we've been able to survive in spite of all these things. So I wonder like what thriving will look like. So just like that kind of vision of what like thriving looks like is also very healing because like imagine that there will be change. And also, like, they're my friends now. Like, it's always good to see your friends and like do like good stuff with your friends too. So I just think, like, again, it's been such an important space for all of us for different reasons. So yeah, good question. I'm gonna probably ask all my hub members the same thing. But I guess just to keep us moving too, maybe my question is, to Juan, I'm also interested in how you find joy just more broadly in Kern County. I know there's a lot of heavy stuff, and I have a lot of respect for you. Just holding up and being like a veteran in all this work too. But I know there's a lot of other sides of organizing too. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
Oh, definitely. Thank you, Pedro. And I think, like my colleagues, Marcel, Shairia, and you, Pedro, I think grounding ourselves with our family, our neighborhood, our friends, I think that brings a lot of joy, right? And definitely on the community building, when we build community, when we bring community on the same space, that brings a lot of joy. I mean, anybody that has Facebook, I invite you to follow CRP on Facebook, and you could probably, all the pictures you're gonna see, very few of them are gonna be of actual actions that we're doing. Most of them are actually gonna be like gatherings, like a potluck, someone's birthday from the community. And that's the best part of it. I've been a community organizer for 10 years now, and I have only been a community organizer for CRP. I learned how to be a community organizer here. And my boss, Lupe Martinez, one of the first things that he told me being a community organizer, he said, be ready to gain weight, because you're gonna go to people's homes and they're gonna feed you no matter what, because that's the nature of our communities. They are going to feed you. And do not dare say no. You eat with them, because they're sharing whatever little they have with you. So I took it to heart, and that was a prophecy. I have gained a lot of pounds in the last 10 years, but it is amazing. It is amazing to just knock on someone's door and you have a flyer on your hand and you're like, I came to drop this flyer, and the first thing they tell you is, you want to eat? Like, I have chile rellenos, I have tamales, I have pozole. You want to come in? And it's like, yes, I do. And so it's funny because I literally, well, now because of the pandemic, we're not able to meet as regular as we used to, but pre-pandemic, I would literally only eat once in my house, and that was pretty much lunch. I knew that was like my meal at home. And dinner, I would tell my wife, don't even cook dinner for me, because I'm gonna be out in Irvine, I'm gonna be out in Wasco, Shafter. They are going to feed me, believe me. And they have not failed, believe me, they have not failed. They have fed me every single time I have gone to any one of our community members' homes. And that brings a lot of joy, because it grounds you. One more time, it grounds you, because at one point over a meal, we're not even talking about work anymore. Now we're really we humanize our job, right? We're talking about our personal problems, our personal dreams, and you're able to witness some of those dreams come true, right? And then there's a lot of grief in our communities as well that probably is not related to environmental justice, but you're allowed to be part of that grief and to accompany these families. And I think that's the best part of this job, right? The community feeling united, being one, and I think that portion is fantastic, being one. And Nar said, you know what, that community over there, they have their own problem. They said, no, we're one single community, and what affects them is going to affect us, right? Because that's the way that any injustice works. What it breaks them, it breaks me. And what unites them is going to unite me. And that's fantastic. That's a fantastic feeling. That's something that brings a lot of joy to my heart. Thank you for asking me, Pedro. And I guess to close the loop,
Yep.
I'm going to ask Marcel something. I don't know how quick it's going to be, Marcel, but you're a community organizer for Faith in Action. in the past, I have seen a lot of resistance from the faith community, right? Have you noticed any improvement, Marcel? Or did you know any tactics for any of these faith communities to break through and to truly come and support our movements?
That's a great question. I'm a good guy for that. As a guy with a master's in divinity, so I'm gonna give you a theological answer too. All right. I think that like so when Pedro speaks about like white supremacy, right? So white supremacy has also informed many of our faith groups, right? The way in which we understand land, the way in which we understand environment, and it can operate in a way where it gives people of faith a sense of like supersession over the land, like they're intermediaries between heaven and the land, right? And so they don't have a genuine investment. I think what we've seen recently is a shift in which we create theological frames where people understand themselves as stewards, or we understand creation as something to be stewarded, right? And that we have a role in nurturing it, curating it in a way that really kind of makes it beneficial and healthy for all people. So the answer to that is not really. So there's been a lot of attraction to the work that young people have been doing and excitement around that, and we've leveraged that in order to kind of introduce these new theological frames about how do we understand creation, how do we understand land, how do we understand our relationship to the land in which we've historically kind of like overlooked, and that I'm actually optimistic in how those frames begin to shape place, but really a lot in my organizing, what I really see is we're excited about what young people are doing. It's super cool. They've made air quality less nerdy, more trendy. But in the future, I do see theologies beginning to kind of change and reframe in a way where I think communities of faith will invest deeper.
This is a very surprising conversation. I want you to know I'm enjoying it so immensely. You're also very deep and thoughtful. But what you're really hitting is what touches me and has touched me every day for more than 20 years since I first copped to climate change and decided to change my life to try and address the issue. My son is now almost 30. And in the last 20 years, I have to say, I think we've seen very little progress, real progress. All the trend lines go the wrong way. I'm leading up to Q&A to the audience. If folks want to jump in and ask a question here, please do. But I wanted to just say what I really appreciate about what you were all just talking about there is the need to take on this very terrifying work while maintaining a healthy, happy existence, maintaining wholeness and community. And you all speak in a way that strikes me as having found that, or at least knowing how to access that. And it sounds like by working right in the communities that are most impacted by this crisis and multiple crises. Pedro and I were talking earlier in the day about tonight, and we were talking about intersectionality, and really it just came down to it's the same opposition, whatever the issue is. It's the same opposition, that of the status quo interests who don't want to give it up. So I don't see any hands up. If you want to ask a question, there's a reaction box, and then in that reaction box, there would be an option to raise your hand, and then we can call on you. We have someone monitoring these things. You can also comment or ask a question. I appreciate your raise comments. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, but they're very supportive. I'm pausing, seeing if anybody else would like the floor. I'm accused of not sharing it. Okay, no hands going up. I'm going to ask about a specific campaign then. Shada, tell us about climate equity, the city of Fresno, what you're jumping into there. I think this audience is very heavily Fresno centric, and I think it's an opportunity for people of the demographic we're familiar with here. Like me, we're mostly older and white, and many retirees. Okay, we're not sunrise movements. We need a sunset movement. But tell us, what do you recommend?
That's so good. And thanks. Yeah, I'll say a little bit about it. We've been, well, this is first, it only makes sense to start off that like, clearly, Kevin, your work, everyone on this call is a testament to the climate equity, health equity work that's been carried in Fresno for years and decades. the work that I've been part of recently is to plan specific campaigns and key collaborations and measures that target and get at climate-related health impacts in Fresno. We've just undertaken like a year-long planning process with community residents that we work with in the most impacted areas of Fresno, and are coming out with a couple campaigns. One is a land use campaign. That's ongoing work that a lot of our organizations, I'm sure, continue really strongly and powerfully. And another is an environmental transparency and accountability campaign. So it's just more clear and more transparent what are the actual, what's the quality of the air and of the resources around us that we're exposed to. And then a third one on climate justice. And we are really hoping to come up with some specific policies that are co-created with community that address many aspects of the climate crisis and hopefully advance specific policy in Fresno. We are definitely like going forward hand in hand with impacted communities. And on top of that, everyone is welcomed into this movement as it builds, as it grows. We're definitely like still just getting onto our feet and want to be having conversations with partners who've been doing this work forever, and see how we can be like a connective force of work that's ongoing already. I know we all see our organizations in that way and providing that service as well.
Thank you. Jure would like to speak. If we can unmute them, and I think you're good. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. And I'm actually not even a part of this organization, but okay, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I accidentally thought this was a different, like an organization I was wanting to support, which was We Are Not Invisible, because they were also having a city council meeting, I think tomorrow. I don't know. I got them confused, but my apologies. But I was like, you know what? I'm here. I rushed home from fucking Walmart. I live in Madeira, and I apologize. I'm probably going to be cursing. I'll try not to do that. But yeah, so I've lived in the Central Valley my whole life, grew up in Madeira, and you know, I don't have all these terms and things like as well put together. So I'm just going to say it just pretty much straight up how I personally feel about it, which I think reflects how hopefully just the communities, like the low income communities, the communities of color here in Madeira and in Fresno, and then honestly in California, in the Central Valley, feel about these issues. And one of them that I think I want to say personally, I'm a transgender individual. I use he, him, they, them pronouns. And this is what I basically want for others here to hear me out. This shouldn't have to be a normal thing. We shouldn't have to be begging and yelling and screaming to tell people, we need help. Please help us. We can't help ourselves. And it just seems so horrible that that is what this system literally does to people of marginalized communities. And marginalized communities can be, you know, there's people with accessibility or disability, like, you know, in that community, there's, you know, people of color communities, and there's also the LGBTQ community, and there's just so many that how the comrades, I don't have the name in my brain right now, but your guys's, you know, organization, your alliance together kind of have a pretty good understanding about. I am not, I guess, someone that's necessarily an activist, but I've always been really wanting to help. And I'm tired of always checking fucking social media or checking Twitter and seeing horrible, horrible things happening in Black communities and happening in low income communities. And we need this shit to stop. We really do. And I'm tired of the you know, like the general feeling of it's so hard to change, you know, why bother? And I had that same fucking perspective. And why bother is because there's people, you know, if you want to help, if you genuinely want to help someone, there are nonprofit organizations, there are communities that you don't even know about right here. I didn't know anything about this. And I'm starting to realize, oh my God, there's people in Fresno that actually understand me, that actually understand the communities that are hurting, that are asking for help. And, you know, we don't, and that's another thing too. So we shouldn't have to be asking. We need to be fucking demanding people. And I guess this might sound pretty radical or whatever, but it's so bullshit. Really, it is. And yeah, it is just really frustrating. And I guess it's frustrated me enough to the point because I just had to go through something so like traumatic because, you know, when you're a low income individual, you're faced with hardships that not everyone's gonna experience. When you're a trans individual, what, you know, basically some people are always gonna have the same experience. And it really just kind of finally popped into my brain. I'm like, you know what? I think I need to do something with this energy or this anger or this, you know, feeling. Rather than stewing in it, I want to be fucking serving it in little fucking bowls and giving it to city council members. Like, eat the fuck up. I made a fucking big ass stew for you. Have some pasoles and all that kind of shit. I don't know. So anyways, I think that's all I'm gonna say because I don't want to get everybody rowdy.
But, I think you're gonna like my article.
Oh.
Hey, Pedro, I'm gonna kick it over to you for a response, please.
Yeah, I mean, part of why I'm in this game is because I like to get rowdy every now and then. It's a good outlet for some of these things. But I guess I'll maybe first like saying that like I think all your concerns are like super valid and you know definitely like as far as like the frustration and like the like just anger, right? For like non-consensual like abuse to like keep like occurring to like us as individuals and like community as well too. Like that is like super valid as well. And I know just like even when you know many times I've tried raising these issues like up in the valley and you know here in the valley and in our communities too, and you know have been either gaslit or like invalidated or you know just like, oh, you sure you're okay, or like are you not just like the angry person, angry like Latino or whatever, like you know. So I know there's just like up front there's a lot of like reluctance to even just like accept those things, right? And like regardless of the cuss words or whatever, like it's super valid. But I think like as far as like just like maybe my perspective, like for Sunrise, and again like we kind of get in where we fit in different strokes, different folks, like whatever space we want to occupy. But I think some of those like concerns, right, of like, hey, I maybe don't know what to do, or like I'm interested in kind of like, you know, activating a little more, you know, that's exactly like harnessing like that kind of energy and like trying to, you know, do some alchemy with it to make sure that like people can like stay in and like be impactful for the limited time. Like that kind of stuff too is exactly what we're trying to harness like in our group as well. Like, I mean, there's always like a learning curve, but I will say at least, and I used to be a high school teacher for a little bit, for 1 year. But, you know, I would explain to my students too, like when they were writing or practicing a skill, I mean, like maybe like it's a little awkward or like there's some struggle right now, but just think of how good you'd be in 10 years or so, right? Like if you can have like a space where we're just like talking for an hour of like people who love this work, just like going and it's like generating like this type of like response too. I mean, maybe we're like doing our job a little bit, right? Like, you know, I think all of us brought the heat, right? So, I mean, I think like it's good to know too that this is something like our messaging is like resonating like across Fresno or like into Madera and like all these other places too, right? Because I think it's kind of how at least like I've in my work like proven to myself that like I'm not going insane. Right, like there are people who like will validate me because like what I'm feeling is real and like there are legit reasons for it. So yeah, that's what I'll kind of say.
Well, yeah, I do agree. Like it, you know, hey, Madeira and Fresno's right next to each other. And Madeira, we don't got hardly shit here. All right. Like we have to go to fucking Fresno to do all our shopping. We got to go, you know, that kind of thing. So in a ways, the Fresno's problems extend out to Madeira's problems. Yes, they might be two different things, but yeah, I really do think that you know, it's important to, at least for me, and I think in general, how to kind of get the spirit or energy from people is just, you know, making yourself vulnerable to others. Like it, you know, it sucks trying to, you know, start a conversation and you're trying to, you know, have people open up. Just ask them how they're doing. Just, you know, I don't know, like talk to them. Like everybody here, we're not, you know, robots, or we're not people that, you know, are just doing a job or a profession. You know, we're people, and we all, you know, have feelings, and we all want to help each other. At least I like to think people want to help. But there are certain individuals in this world that don't really want for us as a community to have a community or have any unity in general. So I think it's important that these kinds of things are talked about with those that want to listen, that those that come here and they want to listen and they have questions that want to get answered. And I feel like I like opened up Pandora's box, so I like don't want to get too meandery. But yeah, I appreciate you guys' response. And if you guys just want to like talk, like you know, I'll let you guys go, but I'll like be here and I'll be listening. I may not just continue to speak because I don't want to take up any more time.
Well, thank you, Jerry, so much for speaking up. I really appreciate your voice and your perspective. I know we all do. And I think it's no coincidence that you happened upon this meeting. Simultaneity is the word that Young gave it. And I think that it speaks to, here's an amazing panel of activists doing tremendous work. And we are moving into the end of our section, or I should say our panel, but there was a question I was hoping somebody might address that Renee has put into the chat asking if anyone is working in the schools K to 12.
I got that.
And go please, Marcel.
Yeah. So Keyshawn's project actually it's located within every high school in Fresno. So he has a team of high schoolers in Fresno, and what they do is they monitor purple airs, and they create an app, and they actually kind of maintain the data to interpret the data and create narratives that they produce to the school district and to city council members. They do a quarterly report with that. We have extended into, during COVID, we extended into elementary schools and middle schools because, you know, we were in technology and it was kind of something for them to do. So we do. I wouldn't say as low as kindergarten, but I think our youngest may be in the 4th grade. And the oldest we have is like in Fresno State. So we have a myriad of that group working on these issues, about 60 of them.
Anybody else like to comment on organizing in K-12? Seeing no one, I will point out, of course, this might not be happening right now, right, Pedro, but Sunrise does say middle school through mid-30s. So if anybody's knowing of a young person who's not in Fresno, who can't access and maybe there isn't organizing going on in their community that they can participate in, there is a model ready to go where Sunrise is saying you can start a chapter or a hub, I should say, in your community. We're moving into final statements, and I haven't really come up with a theme or a question for what that final statement should look like. And thank you, Juan, for posting Principles of Environmental Justice in the chat room, draw that to everyone's attention. I also want to point out before we do the final comments that Measure C is a major climate lever and dollar and equity lever for this community. And you will see articles on that in Community Alliance, and Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability has also initiated a sign-on letter, which ran as an ad in the last issue, and I write about in the upcoming issue. So why don't we go back to our original rotation, which we started with Shada, and we have about 10 minutes here. And I see we're getting some nice thank yous. Oh, that's from Jure. You're welcome. Thank you all. So we're going to start now with Shada and take a couple of minutes and say goodbye and however you choose.
Thanks. Well, this has been very empowering for me. I wanted to, who raised that? It was Renee, I think, who talked about youth being part of this movement. I just want to say, I think we would be lost without youth and following their lead. I think when we grow up, we get lost in the status quo and what has been built and created for this world from decisions that a handful of people have made before us. And we get a little distracted thinking like these are the terms of justice that we have to be operating within. So I think it's so important. And I hope every organization is welcoming youth involvement, youth leadership, following the voices of youth and in their own brilliance and in their own right. Yeah. And I would just say on top of that, like everyone does have a place in this movement. I was just on a separate, at a separate event where someone was saying like, there's intergenerational harm that is done when we keep everyone separate. We do need spaces for youth and we need to be connecting. There's space for everyone at every age, whether you are retired. We need all the voices in this to bring the sheer power that we need. So yeah, I just want to express my gratitude and I hope everyone feels like they have a way to be engaged after this, even to start a conversation with a community member, look for a public process happening near you about decisions happening in your area, and just be connected with each of us at our organizations.
Thank you, Shada. Juan, would you go next, please?
Definitely. Once again, thank you everyone for being here tonight with us. It has been such a pleasure and such an honor to hear from all of you, literally, with your comments and questions, and just echoing Shada's comments. There's multiple generations amongst ourselves, right? And to be able to understand and make a space for every single one generation with their own feelings, with their own emotions, with their own goals, right? We have been at this for so long. The environmental justice movement, the social justice movement as a whole, that we need to embrace each other. We need to finally embrace each other and say, let's do it together, right? I always say this, environmental justice movement is the movement of all the movements, because when we fight for clean air, we don't just fight for clean air for low-income communities. Everyone is going to benefit from it. When we ask for clean water, access to clean water, we're just not talking access to clean water for low-income communities. It's for everyone, so that all of us together as a one single family on this planet, on Mother Earth, we can be successful, we can be joyful, but that overall we find love. And love is what's gonna keep us together at the end of the day. I always get this from oil workers who said, you know what, you hate us. That's why you're doing this work, because you hate us. No, I don't, believe me. That would be the last thing I wanna do in my life, to hate someone. I do it because, one, I love myself too much. And I love my family members too much, and my neighbors too much, and everything it's races and it's born out of love. And it's the love of this life. And I would love to see everyone to be happy on a very level field. And that's what we're looking for. Once again, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you very much. And Pedro, would you go, please?
Yeah, I guess, first I'll start off with my gratitude for everyone for spending the evening with us, and also for the gratitude for everyone kind of putting in the work for the long term. I know we were just, the panelists were speaking, but I'm sure there was a lot of, efforts that's been put in from our audience as well. There's a reason why you're probably interested in learning about us. So, definitely, I want to, appreciate that as well. But what I'll say is a couple of different things. One is that, this work is important because politicians can smile and they can be nice and, you know, send back political favors, but more broadly, you know, politicians, even the Democrats, are not meeting our needs and are sabotaging our communities. And so as an act of love, you know, in recognition that my mother deserves clean air and that, you know, your cousin deserves clean water, you know, we need to make sure that these systems work for us and not tolerate any of the abuse that is handed down unconsensually into our communities. You know, and again, I think that's something that's, you know, maybe took a longer time than maybe I would have wanted for me to actually learn that lesson. But I do think that this is, you know, at the end of the day, we're putting all this work because we care about something. Like, you know, I want to help the future. Like I have 3 dogs. Like I want a nice future for my dogs too. Like they're great, small, medium, and large dogs. Like, you know, and ultimately too, like it's important to cultivate other parts of your identity aside from the work. Like, you know, I'm a musician, like I love art, like I love bird watching too. Like there's a lot of other, you know, components to like my own like identity that I really want to keep nurturing as well. So I would encourage like younger organizers or like anyone else to like, because it's easy to get caught in the quicksand of activism. So I just really want to also just say like cultivate, you know, your own identity. And, you know, I think by us choosing the identities and like cultures we want to be a part of, like this is how we build, aside from destroying like white supremacy culture, this is how we build something newer that's resilient and meets our needs. And so I just think I really want to leave that message, and again just end with my appreciation. Like I love the Valley, I'm from here, I don't want to go anywhere, and it's a beautiful place. I want to do what I can. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pedro. Marcel, you get to bat cleanup.
Oh yeah, I don't got much. So I wanted to say that the struggle does continue. They just had the joy question earlier, and I think that there is some joy about the Dawn Initiative that is emerging out of a factory that had been historically polluting Fresno, that was asked to move and decided to close down, and they actually gave community members the money that they were going to give that factory to actually move with. And so there's the Dawn Initiative happening, where young people and community members are beginning to imagine, how do we do the healing work after being polluted for so long? And you know, the fight still continues. There's currently a rezoning effort that Kevin's very familiar with, that needs to be engaged, needs to be disrupted, and needs to be rallied against. And so as the wins comes, we celebrate and enjoy, and the struggle does continue. So I do hope that everyone continues to join us on the front line and fight for change and transformation.
Thank you, Marcel. And just a reminder to folks that Community Alliance is where you find these issues written about, and where all of us contribute articles about our work, and if you're me, your opinion. Also on KFCF 88.1 FM, twice a month, the second and fourth Fridays from 5 to 6 p.m. is Climate Politics. And everyone on this panel has been a guest at least once on that show, and more than once in most cases. And then finally, before I kick it over to Mike to say goodnight to all of us, I do want to, oh gosh, Laura and Camille both have hands up, and we're, I guess we could take a quick minute. I ask that you please keep it really short. Laura, I saw you posted about, I think, fracking and a critical issue. And of course, leadership, I should say, CRPE is in the vanguard on that fight. And I know you're facing committee calls this week. I've been tracking it, but please, Laura would unmute yourself. And if the facilitator would unmute Laura. We've heard our closing final comments, folks. So this is a quick goodbye. Thank you.
There's so many gas leaks in the oil infrastructure. Like in the Lamont, people have been smelling hydrogen sulfide and smells of gases. And then in Sunset Oil Field, there's been backflow of like, when the pressure pushed up gases from fracking, and it came to the surface, like surface expression. And a manager actually smelled the hydrogen sulfide and fell in and died into this swamp.
Thank you, Laura. We're going to pin that as really important, that the fracking and leaking from fracking is critically important, and Juan and CRPE and the work on this issue are just so valuable. But we do need to move over to Camille now to hear what Camille would like to share as well. So if the facilitator would please unmute Camille, we'll move over to Camille. Thank you. Yeah, Camille, you need to unmute yourself, or the facilitator needs to unmute you, but somebody needs to take an extra step here.
There we go, that's me. All right, good. This is a question for people to think about. I know we don't have time now, but I'm just wondering if there are people in any of these organizations represented who are aware of or are thinking about the money that's being sucked out of our communities by the national expense of militarism and war. That's the question. I hope that the organizations that are concerned with the climate think about how this impacts our communities, not only money-wise, but the use of fossil fuels by the military organizations. That's it.
Thank you, Camille. Mike, it's all yours.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. And it was a real pleasure to listen to the voices of people who are engaged in working on climate equity. And I want to invite them to continue the dialogue on the Community Alliance. We're very open to articles from you. And furthermore, we think it's really important that people in the broader community, people who are working on peace issues, on health care, immigration, police accountability, that we hear each other's voices and we can provide unity and solidarity with each other. But we are the voice, and Kevin mentioned KFCF too. KFCF 88.1 is a good source for information. I encourage you to listen to them and to subscribe to the Community Alliance newspaper. And if you can't subscribe right now, maybe you could send us a donation. We need money to be able to produce these special sections like we just did, and get that your voices out to a broader community. And we're also expanding into the South Valley too. So I was kind of really interested to hear about all the activity that's going on in the South San Joaquin Valley. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you all. Good night.